The Duke of Calverton crossed the summer lawn with a bow in his hand and humiliation in his smile, and he offered both to her in front of 200 guests. The heat lay thick over Thornley that afternoon, the cut grass releasing its green sweetness underfoot, and the ladies had arranged themselves along the terrace in muslin the colours of sugared almonds, fanning, watching. A wasp worried at the lip of a spilled glass of negus on the balustrade. He had chosen Archery to humble her. Everyone on the lawn understood that much, even the ones pretending to study the silvered glare of the lake. "Come, Miss Ashe, give us a little sport," the Duke said, and his voice carried the way a man's voice carries when he has practiced carrying it. "You have watched us shoot all the week with such a clever face. I begin to think you fancy you could do better." Verity Ashe set down the dowager's shawl on the back of the chair and folded her hands. "You will want the wind off the lake, Your Grace. It is quartering across the butts since noon." A ripple went through the nearer guests, not quite laughter, the held breath before it. The Duke's smile widened, delighted, because he had wanted resistance, and she had handed him something better. Composure he could break. Wind. He turned the bow in his fingers so the late sun ran along the belly of the yew. "She speaks of wind. Hartley, did you hear? The companion gives us a lecture on archery." He came 3 steps closer, and the smell of him reached her. Linen warmed by the day, and under it the cold mineral smell of the linseed oil rubbed into the bow. That smell undid 11 years in half a breath. The terrace, the fans, the wasp, all of it went thin and far away. "I propose a wager, Miss Ashe." He held the bow level between them. "One end, 3 arrows each. If you outshoot me, I shall apologize to you before all these good people and never tease you again. And if I outshoot you, as I shall, you will sing for us tonight, whether you can or no." "I do not sing, Your Grace." "Then you had better not lose." She looked at the bow. She had been doing very well all week, at not looking at the bows. She had carried Lady Ottoline's smelling salts and her novels and her quarrels across this lawn 3 days running, with her eyes fixed politely on the middle distance, and she had told herself the ache under her ribs was the heat. Now the Duke held the thing out across the space between them, and she saw the bowyer's mark burned into the riser, a small running hair above 2 letters, and the breath went out of her, as though a hand had closed under her stays. Kelsall of Ludlow. She would have known that hair in the dark, by touch, with her eyes bandaged. Her father had owned 4 bows by Kelsall, and loved one of them better than he loved most people. "Miss Ashe?" The Duke tilted his head. He had noticed something cross her face and could not read it. And a man who reads every room he enters does not like to be unable to read a face. "You have gone quite pale. Is it the prospect of singing?" From her chair beneath the lime tree, Lady Ottoline Calverton lifted her lorgnette and surveyed her great-nephew as though he were a dish she suspected of having turned. "Gabriel," she said, in the dry, carrying voice that had been silencing dinner tables since before he was breeched. "If you mean to be a fool, do it briskly. One imagines we have not all afternoon." "I mean to be charming, Aunt." "You mean to be a fool. The two are frequently confused in you." That did get the laugh, and the Duke took it gracefully, spreading his hands to the crowd, because a charmer does not mind being laughed at, so long as he is the one who released the laughter. But Verity had stopped attending to any of them. She had reached out and taken the bow. It was warm from his hand. It was exactly the weight she remembered, 50 pounds at the draw. A little heavy for a woman, and far too heavy for the picture the lawn had decided to make of her. The meek, paid companion who would flail and miss and provide an afternoon's amusement. She closed her left hand around the grip and felt the old, worn dip in the wood, where a thumb that was not hers, but might as well have been, had rubbed it smooth across 1,000 ends. She pressed 2 fingers flat to the inside of her own left wrist, the way she always did, as if to keep her pulse from leaving her body entirely. "An arrow," she said. A footman brought the quiver. The Duke's man had fletched these. Competent, even. the goose feathers trimmed neat and dyed a gentleman's blue, not her father's grey and green. She drew one out and ran her thumb along the cock feather and laid it across the bow. "You may have the first 3, the Duke offered, magnanimous, certain. I should hate to be accused of taking advantage." "You go first, Your Grace." She handed him back the bow. "It is your wager, and your wind." He laughed again, but it had a fractional uncertainty in it now, like a coin that rings not quite true, and he stepped to the line. He was a beautiful man, and he knew the exact value of it. He set his feet and drew, and the muslin along the terrace went quiet to watch the long line of his shoulders open under the blue coat. He shot well. All 3 of his arrows found the gold. Not the center, but the gold, clustered handsomely at 4 o'clock, where the wind had pushed them, precisely as she had told him it would. The terrace applauded. He turned to her with the bow held out, and his whole face arranged for victory. "Your turn, Miss Ash. The gold is not so very far. Do your best, and we shall none of us think the worse of you." She took the bow. She did not think about the lawn, or the 200 faces, or Lady Cassandra Merritt standing at the Duke's shoulder, with her lovely mouth curved like the inside of a shell. She thought about her father's hand over hers on a cold green morning, the goose grease he rubbed into her chilblained fingers, his quiet voice at her ear. "The target is not out there, V. The target is the place inside you that already knows." She set her feet. She set the arrow. She drew, and the old strength came up through her back like a tide coming home, and the bracer she was not wearing burned a phantom line along her forearm. At the top of the drawer, in the breath before the loose, the whole shrieking afternoon went perfectly, blessedly silent. She let the string roll off her fingers. The thrum of it travelled up her arm and into her teeth, a note she had not heard in 11 years, and had heard every night in her sleep. The arrow took the Duke's arrow square in the nock and split it down the shaft to the pile, and the 2 halves stood in the gold like a thing peeled open, and for a moment nobody on the lawn made any sound at all. Then the noise came. A single cry from one of the younger gentlemen, half oath and half delight. And after it the terrace broke into clamour, ladies coming to their feet, fans forgotten, the word split passing mouth to mouth, as though they could not quite trust their own eyes and needed their neighbours to confirm it. Verity heard none of it as words. She heard it the way you hear surf. She was looking at the 2 arrows in the gold, hers driven through the heart of his, and her hands had begun very quietly to shake. The Duke of Calverton stood 3 feet from her, with his mouth slightly open, and absolutely nothing prepared to say. She lowered the bow. She turned, and she set it back into his hands, pressed it there, grip to palm, the way he had pressed it on her, and she closed his fingers around it with both of hers because his own had forgotten the office. Then she stepped back, retrieved Lady Otteline's shawl from the chair, and walked up the lawn toward the house with her chin level and her spine straight and her shaking hands buried in green wool, and she said not one word to any of them. Behind her the noise rose and rose. She heard the Duke say her name once, "Miss Ash," in a voice gone strangely young, stripped of all its practiced music. She did not turn around. The grass hissed under her hem, and the lime blossom was very sweet, and somewhere a blackbird was scolding from the yew walk. And Verity Ash walked into the cool of the great hall, and put her back against the paneling where no one could see her. There she discovered that she was weeping, silently, with her face quite composed, as she had taught herself to weep a long time ago. She had sworn she would never draw a bow in public again. She had sworn it over a coffin in a country churchyard, with the rain coming sideways, and the gravedigger waiting under the lich gate with his hat full of water. And the first time the world put a Kelsall longbow into her hand, she had broken the oath in front of 200 strangers without so much as a struggle. Because the body remembers what the heart has spent years trying to bury, And because, God help her, for the length of one arrow's flight, she had been entirely, savagely happy. That was the part she could not forgive. Not the breaking of the oath, the joy. In the hall, the long case clock counted the seconds with its heavy brass tongue, and through the open doors, the lawn still roared, and the stone floor breathed up its February cold, even in July. Verity pressed her 2 fingers to the inside of her wrist and waited for her pulse to remember whose it was. "Well," said Lady Ottoline Calverton an hour later, settled against her pillows with her cap askew and her eyes bright as a jackdaw's. "You have ruined him, you know. He will be perfectly insufferable about it for a fortnight, and then he will be worse." Verity drew the brush through the old woman's thin silver hair and said nothing, because she had not yet decided which of the several things she might say would betray her least. The candle on the dressing table smelled of clean beeswax. The comb gave off the faint, warm ghost of the lavender water in the dowager's hair. "I had not the smallest notion you could shoot," the dowager went on, watching her in the glass. "And I make it my business to have notions about everyone. It is the only entertainment left to me. Where does a companion of 25 learn to put an arrow through a duke's pride at 60 yards? In the country, my lady, there is little else to do." There is a very great deal else to do in the country. Most of it tedious, none of it that. The lorgnette came up. "You shot like a person who has been taught by someone who loved it. There is a difference, you know, between a girl who has been given lessons and a girl who has been given a vocation. I have buried 2 husbands and a quantity of illusions. I know the difference between accomplishment and grief when I see them wearing the same gown." The brush stilled. Verity met the dowager's eyes in the mirror and found there, behind the malice and the wit, something disconcertingly kind. "My father taught me," she said. "He is gone now. I would rather not speak of it, if your ladyship will allow." "I shan't allow it. I am a tyrant. But I shall postpone it." Lady Ottoline patted the air, which was as near as she came to gentleness. "Now go to bed before my great-nephew thinks of some excuse to send for you, which he will, because he is a Calverton, and we cannot bear a question we cannot answer. You are a question, child. You have been here 6 days carrying my novels, and you have just become the most interesting question in 3 counties." She caught Verity's wrist as she turned, caught the very wrist Verity was forever pressing her own fingers to, as though she knew. The old hand was dry and light and very strong. "He meant to be cruel today, and you made him ridiculous instead, and you did it without raising your voice. That is a rarer art than archery. Guard it." Out in the corridor, with her candle throwing long shadows up the panelled walls, and the house ticking and settling around her in the summer dark, Verity met the Duke. He was leaning in the embrasure of the tall window at the stairhead, still in his shooting coat, his cravat loosened, and he had a half-broken arrow in his hands. Her arrow, or his. The one she had split, carried up from the lawn and turned over and over in his restless fingers. The night air came cool through a window cracked against the heat, smelling of stocks and stable-yard, and the green river damp of the lawns. He straightened when he saw her, and for a creature so practiced in entrances, he looked, just then, remarkably like a man who had not planned his next sentence. "Miss Ashe." "Your Grace," she made to pass. "It is late. You owe me an apology," he said, and then, before she could let the affront show, he held up the broken arrow between them like a flag of truce, and a confession at once. "Not for the shot. For the shot I owe you an apology, which I mean to pay properly, with witnesses, since I incurred the debt with witnesses. No. You owe me an apology for letting me make a fool of myself this morning at breakfast, when I told the table that ladies who lecture men on wind have generally never felt one." His mouth twitched. "You let me say it. You let me load the pistol, and then you stood very still and let me fire it into my own foot. That was unkind, Miss Ashe. That was beautifully, deliberately unkind. and I have been admiring it all afternoon." She had not expected that, and she felt the unexpectedness move across her face before she could stop it. "There," he said softly, watching her the way he had watched her on the lawn. That hunting, baffled attention. "That. You did it again. Something goes across your face like weather, and then it is gone, and the shutters are up. Who are you, that you can shoot like the captain of a company, and curtsy like a paid companion, and look at a man as though you have already read the last page of him?" He came a half step out of the embrasure. "I find I cannot stop wishing to know." "I am Lady Otterline's companion, Your Grace. There is nothing else." "There is a very great deal else." And she heard, with a small private shock, the dowager's own words come out of his mouth, the family resemblance surfacing in the cadence. "You are a poor liar for a clever woman. You went white as the cloth when I handed you the bow. Before you drew. Before you knew you could win. The bow frightened you, Miss Ashe, and a thing that frightens a woman who is afraid of nothing is a thing I should very much like to understand." For a moment, she nearly told him. The candor of him reached into her like a key into a lock she had thought rusted shut, and that was its own kind of danger. More dangerous than Lady Cassandra's shell-curved smile, because Cassandra wanted to ruin her, and this man only wanted to know her, and being known was the one luxury she could not afford. "Good night, Your Grace," she said. She left him at the window with the broken arrow in his hand, and as she went down the corridor, she heard him say to himself, to the dark, in a tone of pure, rueful wonder, "Ashe's daughter. By God, it has Ashe's hair on the riser." And then, sharper, to her retreating back, "Miss Ashe, where did your father shoot?" She kept walking, but her candle flame shivered, and she knew that the question she had crossed 2 counties and changed her name's whole meaning to outrun had found her after all, and that it wore, of all the faces in England, the face of the man whose father had taken everything from hers. He sent for her after church. That, at least, she had been clever enough to predict. She had spent the night arranging her defences, and the morning carrying Lady Otterline through the village service, the box pew smelling of dust and old hymn books, the parson's voice droning under the wasps in the high window. And when the footman came across the lawn with the Duke's compliments and the request that Miss Ashe attend his grace in the long gallery, she had her face already shuttered and her hands already still. The long gallery ran the whole north front of Thornley, 140 feet of dim, cool air, smelling of beeswax and old canvas, the Calverton ancestors glowering down from their frames at the parquet they had paid for. Her shoes woke small echoes off the polished boards. The Duke was at the far end, with his back to her, and beside him, on a green baize trestle that had no business in a picture gallery, lay a longbow. Even at 40 feet, even before her eyes had adjusted from the glare of the lawn, she knew it. She knew it the way you know a voice through a wall. "I had it brought up from the armory this morning," the Duke said without turning. "I have looked at it perhaps 4 times in my life, and never once properly. My father kept it in a case lined with green velvet, which is an absurd amount of ceremony for a length of yew, and he would let no one touch it, which my father was inclined to do with a great many things he could not enjoy." He laid one finger on the riser, on the small burned hair. "Kelsall of Ludlow. The same maker as the bow I handed you yesterday. That one is mine, a common enough thing. Half the gentlemen in the county shoot Kelsalls. But this one..." He turned at last and looked at her down the long room. "This one has a name scratched under the grip. Very small, where a man would put his thumb. Come and read it to me, Miss Ashe. My eyes are not what they were, and I find I cannot quite make it out." It was a test, and they both knew it, and she walked the length of the gallery toward it, with the ancestors watching, because to refuse was to confess, and to comply was to confess, and she would rather confess on her feet. She came to the trestle. The baize smelled faintly of must, and the candle stub beside it of cold tallow. She did not need to bend to the scratched letters. She had watched her father cut them with the point of his bodkin on a wet afternoon when she was 9. "It says E. Ash," she said. "And under it, Hartwell, 1806. My father's hand. My father's bow." She lifted her eyes to the Duke's. "Your father won it from mine at the Grand National Meeting at Hartwell in the summer of 1808, Your Grace, in a match for 200 guineas and the captaincy of the company. My father shot the better score, and your father was given the prize. And within the year, my father was a ruined man and a byword, and we left Hartwell in a hired cart, with the rain coming through the canvas." Her voice did not rise. "So you see, I have read the last page of you. I read it 11 years ago. Now you have your answer, and I should like to go back to my mistress." The gallery was very quiet. Somewhere below, a door closed, and a dog barked twice and was hushed. The Duke had gone still in a way she had not seen in him. All the charming surface drained off, leaving something underneath that was younger and harder and genuinely shaken. "My father cheated yours," he said. It was not a question. "I did not say that, Your Grace." "You did not have to. You said he shot the better score and was given nothing, and that I can do the arithmetic of." He put both hands flat on the trestle on either side of the bow and bowed his head over it, and when he spoke again, his voice had lost its music entirely. "There was a scandal. I was a boy, 16, away at school. I remember my father came home from Hartwell in a black humour that lasted a season, and there was talk, hushed when I came into rooms, of a gentleman archer disgraced for a foul, an arrow shot after the call, a wager dishonoured. I never knew the name. He said it as though tasting it. Ash, and the man they broke for it. That was your father, and he was innocent." He was innocent. Her voice did not break, because she had said it 10,000 times to the inside of her own skull, and the words had worn smooth as the grip under her thumb. "He shot last, after the bell, everyone agreed it. But he did so because the field judge waved him on. The judge later denied it. The judge was your father's man, and his place was bought the following Michaelmas with a living worth 400 a year." She heard her own breath go ragged and steadied it. "My father's score was struck. His name was struck. The company he had founded would not have him at its dinners, and he was not a man who could live as a byword, Your Grace, having lived as a byword's opposite." She made herself go on, because to stop was to feel it. "He put away his bows. He let me keep one, the morning bow, the cheap one, for the grief of it. And then, one wet spring, he took a chill walking the water meadow, and would not send for the physician because we could not pay him. And we lost him. And I buried the morning bow with him, because I could not bear the look of it, and I swore I would never draw again where anyone could see." She found she was breathing hard. "And yesterday you put a cowsel in my hand on a lawn full of strangers, and I broke that oath in the time it takes to loose an arrow. Are you content now, Your Grace? Is the question answered to your satisfaction?" "No," he said. "It is not in the smallest degree answered, and I am the furthest thing from content. And I find I cannot give you back to my aunt, as though you had merely lost me a wager." He lifted his head. "Miss Ash, I'm going to set this right." "There is nothing to set right. He is gone. A name on a churchyard stone cannot be unstruck." "A name in the records of a company can." The old charm tried to come back into his face, and met something graver, and turned, in the meeting, into something she had not seen on him before. Resolve. "I am the patron of the Hartwell Company. I inherited the office with the dukedom. Like a gout, I did not earn. The minute books are in my muniment room, not 40 feet beneath us." He came round the trestle. "Somewhere in them is the entry that broke your father, and somewhere, I would wager my own bad reputation, is the truth of who shot the fowl. Because men who arrange a lie generally cannot resist writing the truth down somewhere private to admire it. I propose we find it. We, Your Grace. You read a target better than any man on my estate. I imagine you read a ledger as well. He held out his hand across the bow, across her father's bow, palm up, an offer, not a command. Help me. Not for me. I have done nothing to earn a single hour of your time, and I know it. Do it for the name on this riser. Let us go down into the dark together and find out what my father wrote. She looked at his open hand for a long moment. Outside the high windows, the summer pressed gold against the glass, and the beeswax smell wrapped them both. And below, in the bowels of the great house, lay 11 years of her grief, catalogued and shelved by strangers. 1 hour, she said, and you will not touch this bow again until you have earned the right. Agreed. He drew his hand back, unoffended, and something flickered at the corner of his mouth that she would later learn to recognize as the beginning of respect. You drive a harder bargain than my men of business, Miss Ashe, and they have driven me to the edge of an apoplexy more than once. Come, mind the third stair down. It has been loose since the conquest, and no one will mend it. The muniment room lay below the gallery, a stone vault with a single high-grilled window and shelves of deed boxes furred with the particular grey dust of documents no one loves. The cold of the place came up through the soles of her shoes, a cellar cold that smelled of damp stone and iron and the brown sweetness of old paper going to powder. A branch of candles threw their light across a long oak table scarred with 2 centuries of penknife and sealing wax burns. They did not, that first hour, find anything but their own tempers. The Duke pulled boxes down and let them thump on the table in clouds of grit, and read the labels aloud in a bored drawl. And Verity, kneeling on the cold flags to reach the lower shelves, found that his idea of searching was to open a thing, despair of it, and reach for the next. You have looked at 4 boxes, she said, and read none of them. I have read the outsides of all of them, which in a well-ordered muniment room ought to be sufficient. It is not a well-ordered muniment room. It is a room a man hid something in. The order is the disguise. She lifted a box marked Rents, Lower Coombe, 1790 to 1799, and set it pointedly before him. A man who wished a paper never found does not label the box, "Here is the paper." He files the summer of 1808 under turnips. The Duke looked at the box, and then at her, and something in his face rearranged itself. You think like a person who has hidden things. I think like a person who has gone looking for them. She wiped her grey palms on her apron. There is a difference, but not a large one. Read me the box. He read her the box. By the end of the hour, his cravat was loosened, and there was grit in his dark hair, and ink along the side of his hand, and he had stopped drawling. They were 3 afternoons at it in the end. 3 afternoons stolen from the Dowager's service, 3 evenings of the Duke contriving, with a sleight of hand she had to admire, to excuse her absence to a house party that would have torn her to ribbons had it guessed what occupied her. He arranged a fiction of errands, a lending of books, a phantom toothache for his aunt. He lied to the ton with the ease of a man who had been performing for it since the schoolroom. And Verity, who lied only out of necessity, watched the talent with something between disapproval and awe. In his shirt sleeves, with ink on his cuff and his dark hair falling forward, he looked less like the Lord of the Lawn and more like a clerk who had been at it since dawn. And Verity found the change disarming in a way she resented. On the second afternoon, she learned the shape of his loneliness without his ever saying the word. He had risen to fetch a fresh candle, and on his way back, he stopped before a tin deed box pushed to the dark end of the lowest shelf, and his whole easy body went still over it. He did not open it. He only stood with his hand flat on the lid for a moment, the way a man rests his hand on a gate he does not mean to go through. My father's private accounts, he said when he felt her watching. I have never read them. I find I had rather go on not reading them. And yet here I am, going through every box in the room but this one. He came back to the table with the candle, and the old likeness pasted carefully back over his face. Do you know, Miss Ashe, the curious thing about inheriting a man entire, his house, his debts, his beaus, his company, his sins, is that you spend your whole life being measured against him by people who knew him, and not one of them ever liked him. And they cannot forgive you for being kinder, because it makes them complicit in having flattered a man they feared. He set the candle down. I have been charming to 2 counties for 10 years, to keep them from looking too closely at what I came from. You are the first person in some while who looked closely on purpose. It is uncomfortable. I find I do not want it to stop. She did not answer that, because she had no safe answer, and bent back over the dues book. But the cold vault felt, after it, a half-degree warmer. On the 3rd afternoon, the heat lay so heavy that even the stone vault had warmed, and the candle flames stood up straight as soldiers. The Duke leaned back, rubbed his eyes, and said, I have read the entry for the dinner of 1809 4 times, and I cannot escape the conclusion that the Hartwell Company spent £11 that year on claret and 4 shillings on the relief of a widowed member. And I begin to understand the whole moral character of my father's England. It surprised the laugh out of her before she could prevent it. A small, real laugh, the first in days, escaping into the dusty air. He looked up at the sound as though she had handed him something, and did not crow over it, only let his face open in quiet pleasure, which undid her rather more than crowing would have. You did not strike me, Miss Ashe, as a woman who laughed. I am not, generally. She bent back over her page to hide her face. It is the dust. It has affected my judgment. It is the claret to charity ratio. It affects everyone's. 40 years on, it has affected mine. He drew the candle nearer and bent again to his ledger, but the air between them had changed temperature, the way the air changes when banter cracks and something true shows through the seam, and they both felt it, and neither named it. Read me the dues book for 1808 again, the summer meeting. Who paid late? She read, and in the reading, because grief had made her a careful reader, she caught what 3 days of his ducal impatience had skated over. A single member's dues marked remitted by the patron in a different ink. A Mr. Soames, who in the same season had been raised from field steward to a clerkship, and whose name appeared, when she chased it 3 boxes along, as the second of the 2 judges at the Grand National Meeting. The judge who had stood beside the bought judge, and said nothing. There, she said, and laid her finger on it, and her hand was steady, though her heart was not. 2 judges, your grace, not 1. The man whose place your father bought, and this man, Soames, whose debts your father forgave the same summer. 1 to wave my father on past the bell, 1 to swear afterward that no such signal was given. The dust hung gold in the candlelight between them. It took 2 to break in. I always knew it took 2. The Duke looked at where her finger lay for a long moment. Then he covered her hand with his, briefly, without design, the way a man steadies a thing he is afraid will be snatched away. And the contact went through her like the thrum of a loosed string. They both went very still. The candle guttered, and somewhere far above them, the dressing bell began to ring across the lawns, to call the careless ton in to dress for dinner. I am going to put it right, he said again, quietly. And I am going to do it where it was done wrong. In public, before the company, before the county. Your father lost his name in front of them. He will have it back in front of them. He drew his hand away, slowly. But I will need the proof entire, and there is 1 box I cannot find. And I think, Miss Ashe, that someone has been into this room before me. What box? The judge's returns for 1808. The original scoring cards. His eyes came up to hers, and the charm was all the way gone now, and what was under it was grim. They are gone, and the only soul besides ourselves who has asked the under-butler for the key to this room this fortnight, he told me not an hour ago, thinking it would please me, is Lady Cassandra Merrid. She had her first true measure of Lady Cassandra that same evening, in the long drawing-room after dinner, before she understood there was anything to measure. The room was lit for company, 40 candles doubling themselves in the pier glasses, the air close with hot wax and orris root, and the green smell of the cut roses crammed into every Chinese jar. Verity sat where a companion sits, near the door, with a basket of the dowager's mending, and Lady Cassandra crossed to her through the chatter as though crossing to an old friend, silver bracelets sliding cool down her wrist. "Miss Ash, you sew? How restful. I have never had the patience for it. One wants a thing to show for one's afternoons, do not you find?" She had pitched it just loud enough. Two matrons by the harp turned their heads. "Though I hear your afternoons have been wonderfully various of late. The Duke keeps you busy." "Her ladyship keeps me busy," Verity said, drawing her needle through. "His Grace, I scarcely see." "No?" The grey eyes were lit with the particular pleasure of a hunter who has found her quarry pretending to be a stone. "How odd. I could have sworn, but I am forever imagining things. Pray, go on with your little stitches. They are so very neat. One can always tell a girl who has had to be useful." She drifted off in a cool wash of jasmine scent, leaving the barb in, and the two matrons exchanged a look. And Verity set another stitch, and felt the room's temperature toward her drop by a degree she could measure exactly, the way she could measure wind. It was elegantly done. There was not one word in it she could have repeated to anyone as an insult. She understood, sitting there with the candle heat on her cheek and the needle steady in her fingers, that she was being shot at by an archer quite as practiced as herself, and that the woman had not yet drawn anything near her full weight. Lady Cassandra Merrid was the most beautiful woman at Thornley, and she had arranged for everyone to agree on the point before the first dinner was cleared. She was the daughter of the Earl of Staunton, and she wore her father's rank the way other women wore their pearls, and she had come into Verity's narrow life like a draught under a door, a coolness first, and only later the understanding that the cold had a direction and a purpose. She found Verity in the rose garden the next morning, where the heat had not yet burned off the dew, and the blooms hung heavy and overblown, dropping their petals on the gravel with a small papery sound. Bees worked the lavender along the path with a low, continuous murmur, and somewhere beyond the wall a scythe went whisk, whisk through wet grass. Lady Cassandra was very lovely against the roses, in primrose silk, and she smiled. And the smile did not reach the cool grey assessing eyes. "Miss Ash, Lady Otterline's little marvel, we have all been so diverted by your archery." She drew off one glove, finger by finger, and Verity recognized it for what it was, a duelist settling her stance. "I confess I have been curious about you, a companion who shoots like a yeoman of the old guard. So I made some inquiries. I have a great uncle in the Hartwell country, you know. He remembers a scandal. He remembers an ash." "Many people do, my lady." "He remembers a man put out of his company for shooting a fowl and lying about it, for cheating at a gentleman's match and then whining of conspiracy when he was caught. A man so lost to honour that his family crept away by night in a hired cart." She let the glove fall open in her hand. "And here is his daughter, in a borrowed gown, charming her way through a ducal house party and into a ducal muniment room at improper hours. People will talk, Miss Ash. People are already disposed to talk. It wants only a little direction." The petals dropped. Somewhere a wood pigeon turned over its 3 soft notes and turned them again. Verity stood very still and let the woman finish, because she had learned long ago that the most disarming thing in the world is to refuse to flinch. "You have the scoring cards," she said, when Lady Cassandra had done. "You took them from the muniment room. So you know, my lady, as well as I do, what they say, which is why you took them. You would not steal a paper that proved my father a cheat. You would frame it and hang it in the hall." It landed. For a quarter of a second, the lovely face flickered, the duelist taking a touch she had not foreseen. And then the smile sealed over again, harder. "You are clever. Your father was clever too, I'm told, and look where it brought him." She came a step closer, and the jasmine of her was suddenly cloying in the warm air. "Hear me, Miss Ashe. The Duke is going to offer for me before this party ends. It is arranged. It has been arranged since we were children. His estate wants my £40,000 rather more than his pride will admit, and my father wants the strawberry leaves. And what our fathers want, we do." She drew her glove back on, smoothing each finger. "You are a diversion. He collects diversions. It is the only appetite a man so idle has left. When the music stops, you will be carrying smelling salts across a lawn, and I shall be the Duchess of Calverton, and I will not have a ruined Fletcher's brat muddying the water in the meantime. Leave the muniment room. Leave the Duke. Go back to your mistress and your middle distance, or I will tell the county exactly who you are, and this time there will be no charming Hartwell judge to wave you past the bell." She turned in a swirl of primrose silk and went up the path, and a last rose let go of itself behind her and scattered across the gravel. Verity stood among the dropped petals and pressed 2 fingers to the inside of her wrist and found her pulse running fast and even. She was not afraid. That was the discovery of the morning, and it surprised her. She had spent 11 years afraid of the name, of the bow, of being seen, and somewhere in the last 3 days, across a table in a stone vault, the fear had quietly changed its shape. She was not afraid of Lady Cassandra. She was afraid only of one thing now, and it was a worse thing and a sweeter one, and it had ink on its cuff and her father's bow under its protection, and she had no business in the world wanting it. "She is quite right, you know," said Lady Otterline that evening, when Verity had told her all of it, not because she meant to, but because the old woman had looked at her over the cards and said, "Child, you have the face of a girl carrying a stone. Put it down where I can see it." And Verity had been too tired to lie. About the £40,000. Thornley eats money. Gabriel's father saw to that. He spent like a man trying to fill a hole in himself, which is precisely what he was. And the hole is now my great-nephew's to fill. And a rich, cold, well-bred wife is the obvious trowel. The lorgnette swan. She is wrong about everything else. She is wrong that he collects diversions. He performs charm because he has never been permitted to find out what is under it, which is a different and sadder thing. And she is wrong, I think, about which of you is the diversion. The old eyes were suddenly very sharp. He looks at you, Verity Ashe, the way I have not seen a Calverton look at anything since my husband looked at the morning his horse came in. It is a great inconvenience to him, and he has not the faintest idea what to do about it. Now, what will you do? My duty, my lady. I will help him find the truth of my father's name, because I owe my father that, and then I will go away, because I owe myself that. That is a very tidy answer, and I do not believe a word of it, the Dowager began, with maddening composure, to deal herself a game of patience, the cards whispering off her thumb. But I will postpone that argument too. I have a great many postponed arguments with you, child. You are the most interesting debt I have run up in years. She laid a black queen on a red king. Find the cards. He will need them, and so will you. A name is the only thing the world cannot give a man back once it has taken it, except another person who knows the truth of him and refuses to look away. You may yet give your father one of those, and Gabriel the other. Now go to bed, and Verity. She did not look up from the cards. When you have given them their names back, Do not be such a fool as to leave before someone has had the chance to make you stay. They found the cards, because Verity thought like a woman who had hidden things. Lady Cassandra had not destroyed them. That was the Duke's first dark fear, voiced low in the muniment room, with the door barred and the candle smoking. But Verity shook her head. She will not have burned them. A weapon is only a weapon while it exists. Ash threatens no one. She has hidden them where she can produce them or suppress them as it suits her. Somewhere in her own keeping. Somewhere a lady's maid would not think to disturb. She thought of primrose silk and the cool grey eyes and the great care the woman took to be looked at. Her writing box. A woman who hoards a thing she means to use keeps it close, under her own hand, behind her own lock. It was the Duke who got them. Not by any breach of honour, he was at great pains to tell her, his charm reasserting itself in his relief. But because Lady Cassandra's maid was sweet on the second footman, and the second footman owed his place and his happiness to a master who asked very little and gave a great deal. The writing box went down to the still room to be mended of a sprung hinge it had not that morning possessed, and it came back mended and lighter by 3 cards. The Duke laid them on the green baize before Verity that afternoon, as though laying down his heart. The vault was cold. The cards smelled of someone else's sandalwood, of a lady's box, an alien smell to lie over her father's ruin. The scoring cards for the Grand National Meeting, summer of 1808. 2 judges' hands, and clipped behind them, in a third hand, a private memorandum that Soames, the underjudge, had been fool enough and vain enough to write to the Bort judge, and the Bort judge fool enough to keep. The ash arrow was true and timely, the bell not yet rung when his fingers left the string. But his grace will have it otherwise, and his grace pays our shot, so otherwise it shall be. God forgive us the both. Verity read it twice. Then she put it down very carefully on the baize, because her hands had begun their old shaking, and she pressed her fingers to her wrist, and she found that she was, after 11 years, entirely unable to speak. There, the Duke said, very gently. He did not touch her. He stood across the table, with his ruined, charming face grave and bright at once, and let her have the moment whole. There it is, Miss Ash, in Soames's own hand. The ash arrow was true and timely. Your father did not cheat. He was the only honest man on that field, and 3 dishonest ones broke him for it, because my father could not bear to be beaten at the one thing he had bought himself a reputation for. He drew breath. I'm going to read those words aloud, Verity, in the assembly room at Hartwell, at the company's summer dinner, which is in 9 days, and to which, as patron, I may invite whom I please. And I please to invite the whole county and every man who ever struck your father's name from a list. I'm going to give him back his name in the exact place they took it. Will you stand beside me when I do it? It will cost you, she said. Cassandra, the £40,000, to call your own father a cheat before the county. My father was a cheat before the county. His jaw set. The only choice left to me is whether the county learns it from my mouth, honestly, or from Lady Cassandra's, as a weapon. I would rather be the honest fool than the protected one. I have been the protected one all my life, Miss Ash, and I am tired to the bone of the taste of it. Then, because he was who he was, and because the air had grown too heavy to bear, the corner of his mouth lifted. Besides, I find I cannot marry £40,000. It would be such a very dull dinner conversation. And what did you do today, my dear? I accrued interest. I should run mad inside a 12-month. She laughed. She could not help it. The laugh came up through the grief like a spring through stone. And he watched her laugh with naked wonder, and for one unguarded moment they simply stood across the table and looked at one another, with the memorandum lying between them like a small white flag. And Verity understood, with the precise clarity she usually reserved for reading the wind off a lake, that she had fallen entirely in love with the Duke of Calverton, and that it was the worst aimed shot of her whole life, and that she had loosed it straight and true. There came, before the dark, one perfect morning. It was the day before they were to ride for Hartwell, and the Duke contrived, with the airy lawlessness of a man who has decided to stop performing and start living, to have Verity and his aunt and himself breakfast out of doors, on the dewy lawn by the Archery green, before the rest of the house was stirring. Lady Otterline presided over the coffee in a vast morning cap, and pronounced the hour barbarous and the air delightful, and refused to choose between the two verdicts. The grass was silver wet and cold through Verity's thin shoes. The lime blossom dropped its scent, and a thrush worked the hedge with a wet, brown rustling. The butts stood down the green in the early gold, and the coffee steamed, and there was bread still warm from the kitchen, with the crust crackling under the knife the footman drew across it. And for an hour there was no scandal in the world, and no ton, and no £40,000. "Shoot for me," the Duke said. "Not for 200 strangers. For 3 friends and a thrush." He had brought down a kelsel, not her father's, his own, the common one, and he held it out across the wet grass, and this time there was no humiliation in it anywhere. "You said I had not earned the right to your father's bow. I accept the judgment. But you might shoot mine, and let me watch a thing done well by someone who loves it, which my aunt assures me is the rarest sight in England, and which I begin to think she is right about." So she shot, in her old grey gown, with the dew soaking her hem, with her hair coming down and no one to mind it, and she put 3 arrows in the gold for the pure joy of it, the joy she had spent 11 years calling a sin, and the Duke applauded like a boy, and the Dowager said, "One imagines the Hartwell Company will want her back," which would serve them entirely right. And the thrush, startled, gave up the hedge. "There is a wager I never collected," the Duke said, coming to stand beside her at the line while his aunt poured herself more coffee and pretended not to watch them. "You outshot me that first day. I promised, if you did, to apologize before all those people and never tease you again. I have not yet paid either half." He looked down the green, not at her, and his voice lost its lightness. "I find I do not want to stop teasing you, Verity. That is the difficulty. I have spent my whole life being charming to everyone and meaning it to no one. And then you came across my lawn with your face shut up like a house in mourning, and I've been trying to make you laugh ever since." He turned the bow in his hands. "The day you do it, I feel as though I have shot the gold from 60 yards in a quartering wind. When this is over, when your father has his name and Cassandra has gone back to Staunton in a temper, I'm going to court you very badly and very seriously. And you are going to let me, because I have decided that breakfasts are intolerable without you, and I cannot live the rest of my life at intolerable breakfasts." "Your Grace." "Gabriel." He turned to her at last. "When you are standing on wet grass at 6 in the morning, having just disgraced my marksmanship in front of my aunt, you may call me Gabriel. I insist upon it. It is the law of the Archery green." "There is no such law." "There is now. I am the patron. I have just made it. The green is lawless, and I am its only magistrate." And then, more quietly, all the charm gone soft and true, "Say it once, only once, so that I shall have heard it before we ride into the lion's mouth tomorrow." She looked at him in the gold morning, with the dew on his dark hair, and the lime blossom falling, and her father's old joy still warm in her drawing arm, and she let herself, for the length of one breath, be a girl on a lawn and nothing else. "Gabriel," she said. "There," he said unsteadily. "There. Now I am quite ruined, and it serves me right, and I would not have it otherwise." He pressed her hand once, between both of his, over the bow, the warmth of him surprising against her cold fingers, and the thrush came back to the hedge, and Lady Otterline declared the coffee cold, and the morning the best she could remember. For that 1 hour, the future stood open before them, green and gold and unguarded, with the lilacs of next spring already spoken for. It is the property of such mornings that you do not know, while you stand in them, that they are the last of their kind. They knew the trouble the moment they rode into Hartwell, because Lady Cassandra Merritt had got there first. She had left Thornley 2 days before them, pleading a sick aunt, and the Duke had let her go with relief, thinking the field cleared. He had reckoned, Verity saw now, without the cold patience of a woman who has been arranging things since the schoolroom. Cassandra had not gone to a sick aunt. She had gone to the county. By the time their horses came up the Hartwell street, the cobbles ringing under the hooves and the assembly room windows spilling their candlelight onto the worn stone, the whole gathering already hummed with a single, curated story. And it was not the story the Duke had come to tell. It was Verity's. She heard it move through the crowded, glittering room as she came in on the Duke's arm. Heard it the way she heard a roar of applause as surf, before the words resolved. The Ash girl, cheating Fletcher's daughter, wormed her way into Calverton's house, into his muniment room, my dear, at all hours. The aunt's companion, if you take my meaning, and now she has got the poor besotted Duke to agree to stand up before his own father's company and slander the late Duke's memory. To call a buried patron a cheat, all to gild her own ruined name, and he so blinded he cannot see he is being played as her father played the judges at Hartwell. Lady Cassandra stood at the centre of it in silver tissue, lovely as a blade, and she had taken Verity's truth and Verity's love and Verity's father and set them in exactly the frame she had promised, and turned every honest face in the room to flint. The Duke's hand tightened on Verity's. "It changes nothing," he said low, under the hum. "I have the cards. I have Soames's memorandum. The truth is the truth, and I will read it. And every soul here will hear it, as the lie a besotted man was talked into telling," Verity said. She saw it whole, the way she saw a wind. "She has made the truth into evidence of my wickedness before you have spoken a word of it." She kept her voice beneath the noise, her face turned to the candles so that no one might read it. "If you read those cards tonight, Gabriel, they will not hear my father exonerated. They will hear a Duke unmanned by a schemer, disgracing his own father to please his—" She would not say the word the room was saying. "To please me. You will not give my father his name. You will lose your own and his, and I will be the cause, exactly as she designed." Her voice did not shake. It was very strange to her that it did not shake. "Do not read the cards. I will not let her win. You cannot win this room tonight. It is lost. She has aimed it and loosed it, and it has landed. The only thing left to lose is you." She drew her hand from his arm, there in the doorway, with the county watching and the candles guttering in the summer heat, and she made her face into the shuttered house he had first seen across the lawn. "I should never have let you take this up. I knew what it would cost, and I let myself forget, because the muniment room was warm, and you made me laugh, and I am as great a fool as my father, who also believed that the truth would be enough." She stepped back. "Go in. Do your duty by your name. I will go back to your aunt and my middle distance, where I belong, and where I should have stayed." And that night, in the narrow room the inn had given her, with the dinner's noise rising through the boards and the tallow candles smoking, and the unread cards in her own keeping now, and her father's exonerating truth lying useless in her hands, Verity sat at the window in the dark and let the worst of it in, because she had learned long ago that the only thing more dangerous than grief is grief one will not look at. He had used her. That was the shape the night took, and she made herself hold it. The Duke of Calverton had been bored by a house party and amused by a companion who could shoot, and he had played at justice the way idle men play at everything, and when the game grew costly, he would, of course, do the sensible, ducal thing, read nothing, marry the £40,000, and remember the Fletcher's daughter as a diverting summer. He had courted her on a wet lawn to gild an hour. He had pressed her hand over the bow, because pressing women's hands cost him nothing. He had spent his whole life learning that it cost him nothing. The breakfast, the green, the lilacs of next spring. Those had been the most beautiful performance of a man who had told her himself, with his own mouth, that he had been charming to everyone and meant it to no one. She had been the no one. She had let herself be the no one. She had stood on the grass and called him Gabriel, and believed, for one unguarded hour, that a duke would burn £40,000 and his father's memory for a paid companion in a borrowed gown. And the believing was the fowl she had shot after the bell, and there would be no judge in England to wave her past it. The cards lay on the sill, ghost pale in the dark. The dinner roared below. A glass broke somewhere, and a man laughed. Verity Ashe rose from the chair and folded the unread truth into her father's old mourning glove that she carried always, and laid it in the bottom of her box, and put on her bonnet to go down and order the carriage that would take her back to Thornley and out of the Duke's bright, dangerous life before the candles had even burned to their sockets. She got as far as the inn yard, where the ostlers were walking the carriage horses in the warm dark, and the moths beat soft and frantic at the lantern, and the whole yard smelled of hot horse and dung and crushed chamomile from the cracks between the stones, before she found she could not, after all, run away, without doing the one thing she had crossed 2 counties to avoid: telling the truth, out loud, in public, with her own name behind it. It was the Dowager who stopped her, Lady Otterline, who had followed them to Hartwell in her own slow chariot, declaring she would not miss her great-nephew making a public spectacle of himself for anything short of the second coming, and who now stood in the inn doorway in her travelling cloak, with her stick planted and her jackdaw eyes glittering in the lantern light. "Running, are we?" she said. It was not a question. "I had thought better of you. I had thought, at last is a girl who does not run, who splits the arrow and hands back the bow, and walks up a lawn with her chin level. And now I find her ordering a carriage in the dark, like every other frightened creature I have ever had the misfortune to chaperone." She came down the step, refusing the ostler's arm, her stick ringing on the cobble. "You think he has used you? I can see it in your stupid, brave face. You have decided he is his father, because that is a safer thing to believe than that he is himself, and that he loves you, since the first only breaks your heart, and the second requires you to risk yours." The stick came up and tapped, very gently, the centre of Verity's breastbone. "I know the arithmetic, child. I have done it. I did it for 40 years. Now you will listen to an old woman who has buried 2 husbands, and every illusion but one. He has been in that assembly room this half hour, with the cards you left in your box. I did not leave them, which my great-nephew's footman, who is a deal cleverer than my great-nephew, abstracted from your box the moment he saw the carriage ordered, because that boy at least understood what you are too frightened to understand, that the truth in your keeping was never only yours to run away with." The old eyes blazed in the mothlight. "He is reading it now, Verity, to the whole flinted room, alone, with every face against him, exactly as you said it would be. And he is doing it anyway, because you told him not to, and he would rather lose the county than let you be the thing they are saying you are. Now," she drew breath, "will you let the man stand up there alone and bleed for your father's name while you wait in a yard? Or will you go in and do the one thing only you can do? Stand beside him and put your own arrow through the lie, the way you were born to." Verity stood in the moth-beaten lantern light with her heart going like a loosed string, and the worst reading of him fell away from her, not because the Dowager had argued it away, but because the evidence was upstairs, reading exonerating cards to a hostile room with no reward possible but the truth itself, which was the one thing a man who used people would never, ever do. She turned and went back into the inn and up the narrow stair, the boards groaning, the smell of roast and spilled wine and tallow thickening as she climbed, and through the great doors of the assembly room, and the heat and the candlelight and the 200 hostile faces broke over her like a wave. At the far end, alone on the dais beneath the company's banner, stood the Duke of Calverton, with the scoring cards in his hand and his face white and steady, reading Soames's memorandum into a silence gone ugly and dangerous, and not one soul in that room believing a word of it. The ash arrow was true and timely, the bell not yet rung, he read, and the room rustled with contempt, and a man at the back called out, not quietly, "And who put the words in your mouth, Calverton? We can all of us see who." And the laugh that followed was the cruelest sound Verity had heard in 11 years, and the Duke's hand shook, once, and held. "I put them in his mouth," Verity said. She had not known she would say it until the room was already turning. She walked up the centre of it in her grey gown, with her chin level, the way she had walked up the lawn, and the contempt swung toward her like a battery coming round, and she did not flinch, because she had finished this night with flinching. "I am Verity Ashe. My father was Edmund Ashe, whom this company broke for a fowl he never shot, 14 years ago, in this room, at this dinner." Her voice carried, low and clear, over the heads of them. "You all know the name. Most of you struck it from your lists yourselves." She reached the dais, and turned and faced them, and she took the cards from the Duke's hand, took them gently, the way she had once set a bow into those same hands, and she held them up to the candlelight so that the ink showed through. "His Grace has read you a memorandum in a stranger's writing, and you have decided it is a Duke's infatuation talking. Very well. You will not take it from him, and you will not take it from me. So take it from the only thing in this room that cannot lie, that has no estate to gild and no marriage to make and no name to save." She set the cards down on the green cloth of the high table. "Bring out the company's own bow, the patron's bow, the test bow, that hangs on the wall behind you and has hung there since before I was born, and set up a single butt at the end of this room." The murmuring had stopped. She let it stay stopped. "My father was broken on the claim that he could not have shot the gold honestly, that his skill itself was the proof of his cheating, since no honest gentleman shot so well. I am his daughter. I was taught by his hand. Let me shoot." She looked from face to face, slowly, the way she would read a line of butts. "And if I cannot put 3 arrows in the gold, before all of you, with no judge to bribe and no bell to ring, then call my father a cheat, and me a schemer, and have done. But if I can—" Her voice did not rise. It went very quiet, and the room leaned in to catch it. "Then you will know what an ash arrow looks like, and you will know that no man who could shoot like this ever needed to cheat at anything, and you will give my father back his name." The silence held, and then, from the doorway, the dowager's dry voice fell into it like a coin on marble. "One imagines the company can hardly refuse. It would look so very much like fear." They brought the bow. It was a Kelsall. Of course it was a Kelsall, the company's own, the test bow, the twin of the one in the ducal armory. And when they set it in her hand, it was heavy and true, and smelled of linseed and yew, of cold green mornings, and her father's voice. Tables were dragged back with a long shriek of legs on boards, a straw butt carried in and set against the panelling at the room's far end, the painted gold of its face catching the candlelight. Verity Ashe stood at the line they cleared for her, with the whole county arrayed against her, and felt the old tide of strength come up through her back like something coming home for good. She did not think about the room. She thought about her father's hand over hers. "The target is not out there, V. The target is the place inside you that already knows." She set her feet on the assembly room boards where he had stood 14 years before. She set the arrow, She pressed 2 fingers, once, to the inside of her left wrist, and felt her own pulse, steady now, entirely her own. She drew, and the candle flames stood up straight, and the room went perfectly, blessedly silent. And at the top of the drawer she was not afraid of the joy any longer. She let it come. She let it fill the whole drawn shape of her. She loosed 3 arrows into the gold so fast, the room had not finished gasping at the first before the third stood quivering beside it, and the 3 of them clustered tight in the center, close as the petals of one rose, and the thrum of the last string hung in the candle smoke like a struck note. Then she lowered the bow into the absolute stillness, and she turned to the company, and she found her voice was clear and carried to the farthest flinted face. That is what my father taught me. That is what they broke him for being able to do. Now you know. The room broke, but not as it had broken on the lawn into delight. It broke into shame, which is a heavier and a slower thing. The silence of 200 people, each privately doing the arithmetic, and each privately arriving at the same unbearable sum. An old man near the front rose unsteadily to his feet. The company's senior member, who had been a young one at that ruinous meeting, and he gripped the chair back, and his voice cracked across the quiet. I struck his name. God forgive me. I was there, and I doubted, and I struck it. I knew that arrow was true. We all of us knew. We let His Grace's Father buy the knowing out of us. And he bowed, to Verity, to the empty place on the boards where her father had stood, and one by one, like a field of corn going down before a slow wind, the rest of the company rose and bowed too, chairs scraping, candle flames bowing with the stir of so much cloth. And the name of Edmund Ashe came back into the room it had been driven out of. Verity stood among the restored truth of it, with the bow in her hand, and could not, for a long moment, see anything at all for the brightness in her eyes. Lady Cassandra Merrid was already gone. She had slipped from the room while the third arrow was still in the air, the way the dishonest leave any room where the truth has begun to shoot straight. And Verity did not see her go. But the Duke saw Verity. He stood beside her on the dais while the company bowed, and he was not looking at the arrows, or the shamed county, or the restored name. He was looking at her with his whole ruined, charming face, stripped down to the one true thing under it. And when at last she could see again and turned to him, he said, low, for her alone beneath the rising murmur of the room, There is no judge in this room I have bribed, Verity, and no bell I can ring, so you will have to take it from me plainly, as I have nothing left to hide behind. I love you. Not the archery, and not the mystery, and not the diversion of you. You, who walked up my lawn in mourning, and made me wish to be a better fool than my father ever was. His voice was not quite steady. I have lost the £40,000 tonight, and my father's good name, and probably half the county's good opinion, and I find I would pay it all again twice over for the look on your face when the third arrow landed. Marry me, on your terms, whatever they are. I have run out of any wish to be a duke who is merely protected. I should like, instead, to be a man who is known. Be the one who knows me. She did not give him her answer in the assembly room, because some things are not for 200 faces. She gave it the next morning, on the wet green at Thornley, where the lilacs were not yet come, but were promised, and where the thrush had gone back to the hedge. But there was a thing to be done first, and it was Lady Cassandra who did it, which surprised Verity more than anything in that whole bright summer. She came to Verity's room at Thornley on the morning after Hartwell, very early, before the house had stirred, and Verity, opening the door to the smell of the cold corridor and a single guttered rushlight, found her without her armor for the first time. No silver tissue, no shell-curved smile, only a traveling gown and a face scrubbed of all its arrangement, and under the scrubbing, something Verity recognized, because she had worn it herself for 11 years. It was the look of a person carrying a stone. Verity had seen the first edge of it 3 days before, by accident, and had not understood it then. She understood it now. She had passed the library at Thornley in the dusk and seen Lady Cassandra alone inside, not knowing herself observed, standing at the cold hearth with a letter open in her hand, a tradesman's letter, by the cheap grey paper of it, and her lovely face had been doing something it never did in company. It had been frightened. She had read the letter twice, and folded it small and pressed it to her mouth for a moment, as though to keep something in. And then she had smoothed her face into its company shape, and walked out past the very door where Verity stood, and had not seen her. Verity had stepped back into the dark, and let her pass, and said nothing of it to anyone. Now Lady Cassandra stood in the doorway, with the same fright under the same scrubbed surface, and she held out a folded paper, and she laid it, when Verity did not at once take it, on the small table just inside the door, on the surface within Verity's reach, the way one surrenders a weapon by setting it down rather than handing it over.
"My father is ruined,"
she said, without preamble, in a voice gone flat and bare.
"The Earl of Staunton. £40,000 is what I was to bring Calverton. And there is no £40,000. There has been no £40,000 these 2 years. There is a mountain of debt dressed up in a coronet, and my marrying the Duke was to have buried it before the world found out."
She nodded at the folded paper on the table. "So you see we are not so very unlike, Miss Ashe, your father and mine. Only mine deserved his fall, and yours did not. And I have spent this whole summer hating you for the difference. Read it. Go on." Verity took it up and unfolded it. The paper was still cool from the morning corridor. It was in Cassandra's own hand, and at the head of it ran the words, "I, Cassandra Merritt, do freely confess that I removed the scoring cards from His Grace's muniment room, and that I knew, on reading them, that Edmund Ashe was innocent, and that I purposed to suppress the truth and to slander his daughter for my own advancement. And I am ashamed."
"It is signed," Cassandra said, "and witnessed by my own maid, who is the only honest person I have left in my employ. You may show it where you like, to the Duke, to the county. It will finish whatever scraps of my name survived last night, and it will mean that no one can ever again pretend your father's exoneration was got up by a besotted man and a schemer, because the schemer has confessed in her own hand, and the schemer was me." For a moment, the old hardness flickered up, defensive. "Do not imagine I have grown good. I have grown beaten, which is a different thing,
And I find I would rather be beaten honestly than win the way my father wins." Then, lower, the hardness gone out of her.
He stood up there alone and read those cards to a room that hated him for it, all to keep them from calling you what I had taught them to call you. No one ever."
She stopped and swallowed, and finished simply,
"No one ever loved me enough to lose a county for me. I did not know, until I watched it, that I'd wanted them to. I am sorry, Miss Ashe, for all of it. It is a poor, cheap word for what I did, but it is mine, and I am saying it to your face, which is more than my father ever did to anyone."
Verity looked at the confession in her hand, and then at the beaten, lovely, honest at last face of the woman who had tried to ruin her, and she found that the thing she had carried for 11 years, the cold, hard kernel of it, had somehow, in the night, unclenched. "My father used to say," she said slowly, "that the worst archer in England can be made into a passable one, given a true bow and the will to stop lying to himself about where his arrows go." She folded the confession and held it a moment, then set it down again on the table between them, returned the weapon to neither hand, laid it in the neutral ground. "I do not need to publish this. The company has given my father his name. That is done. It does not require your ruin to stay done." She drew breath. "Keep it or burn it. But the truth of you is out now, whatever you do with it, my lady. And I have found the truth of oneself
is a great deal lighter to carry than the lie, however it looks from the outside. I would not wish the lie back on anyone, not even on you."
Lady Cassandra looked at the paper on the table for a long moment. Then she left it lying there and inclined her head, a real bow, small and stiff and unpracticed, and went out, and Verity heard her carriage on the gravel an hour later, going back to Sturton and whatever honest poverty waited there, and she never used the woman cruelly in her thoughts again. She gave the Duke his answer on the green as she had meant to. He was there before her, in his shirt sleeves in the early gold, the dew darkening the hem of his coat where he had thrown it over the bench, and he had brought down from the long gallery her father's bow, the Kelsall with the running hair and the scratched name E. Ash, Hartwell, 1806, and he held it out to her across the wet grass, and this time there was nothing in the holding out but homage. "I said I would not touch it again until I had earned the right," he said. "I do not know that I have earned it. But I have brought it to you, which is a different thing, and a better one, because it was never mine to earn. It was only ever mine to give back. It is yours, Verity. It always was." He looks down the green, not at her. "Take it, and let me watch you shoot it, and tell me, while you draw, whether you will have me, because I find I cannot bear to ask you face to face. You read faces too well, and I have decided I would rather hear my fate while you are looking down the green at the gold, and not at the wreck of me." She took her father's bow. It was warm from the sun, and it was the exact weight she remembered, and the worn dip under the grip fitted her thumb as though the wood had spent 11 years waiting to be fitted. She set her feet on the wet grass. The thrush sang from the hedge. She set the arrow. She drew, and the strength came up through her back, and her father's joy and her own ran together until she could not have told them apart. And at the top of the draw, she said, quite steadily, looking down the green at the gold, and not at him at all,
"Yes, Gabriel, on my terms. The first of which is that you will learn to shoot well enough that I am not ashamed to be seen beside you at the company dinners, for I mean to take my father's place in it, and I will not have a husband who clusters his arrows at 4 o'clock and blames the wind." She loosed. The arrow took the gold square in the center, and the thrum of the string hung in the lime-scented air, and she heard him laugh behind her. The real laugh. The one with nothing performed in it. The one she had spent the summer learning to draw out of him, as surely as he had drawn the joy back out of her. And then his arms came round her from behind, over the bow, over her father's bow, and his face came down warm against her hair. "I accept your terms," he said unsteadily. "All of them. Especially the one about 4 o'clock, which was unkind and beautifully deliberate, and exactly why I love you." They were married in the autumn, when the lilac she had been promised had given way to wood smoke, and the first frost lay along the butts in the early mornings. And the wedding itself took 2 lines in the parish register and no more, because the things that matter take up very little room on paper. Lady Otterline came in a cap the size of a haystack, and wept all through it, and denied it furiously afterward, and dared anyone to say otherwise. The Hartwell Company sent their new lady member a set of silver-tipped arrows and a stiff, ashamed, heartfelt address, restoring Edmund Ashe to the roll of honour. His score for the summer of 1808 entered at last beside the word true. And on a green morning the following spring, with the lilacs out at last along the south wall, and their scent coming heavy and sweet through the open windows, the Duchess of Calverton stood at the end of the long lawn at Thornley with her father's Kelsall bow in her hand, and taught her husband, for the 100th patient time, where the wind off the lake would take an arrow that left the string too proud. The thrush worked the hedge. The cut grass was sweet and wet underfoot. Down the green, the butt stood waiting in the gold, and the 2 halves of a long-ago split arrow hung framed on the morning-room wall behind them, kept for the joke and the memory of it. "Off the lake," she said, "and quartering. You will want to aim a hand to the left and forgive yourself nothing." "I never forgive myself anything since I married you," Gabriel said, drawing,
his arrow leaving the string at last almost true. It is exhausting, and I recommend it to everyone. She laughed, and pressed 2 fingers to the inside of her wrist out of an old habit she no longer needed, and felt her pulse running easy and entirely her own. And the lilac scent came warm across the green, and somewhere a bowstring sang. "Again," she said, and put another arrow in his hand.